You've been carrying something heavy for so long that you've convinced yourself it's muscle. You know that feelings, don't you? That quiet pride when someone calls you resilient. When they say, "I don't know how you do it," and you smile small, tight, because the truth is, you don't know how to not do it. You've built an entire identity around your capacity to endure, to push through, to transform pain into fuel, suffering into strength, weakness into something that looks like power. But here's what no one tells you. Somewhere along the way, you stopped choosing the hard path because it led somewhere meaningful. You started choosing it because the easy path terrified you. You wake up exhausted, but you don't rest. You're overwhelmed, but you don't ask for help. You're in pain, emotional, physical, psychological, but you don't stop. Because stopping feels like failure, softness feels like surrender, and surrender feels like death. This is the core paradox that has quietly colonized your nervous system. The very mechanism that once protected you, your ability to metabolize suffering, to find strength in adversity, to keep moving when others would break, has become the prison you cannot escape. You've become so good at surviving that you've forgotten how to live. The armor you forged in the fire has fused to your skin, and now you cannot tell where the protection ends and the suffocation begins. You are addicted to your own pains. Not because you're broken, not because you're weak, but because at some formative moment, pain became the only language you trusted, the only currency that felt real, the only proof that you were strong enough, worthy enough, enough. And now you sabotage every moment of peace because peace feels like complacency. You create crisis because crisis feels like home. You choose the hardest version of everything because the easy version feels like lying. The thing that saved you is now the thing slowly killing you. Let's be precise about what we're really discussing here. This isn't about ordinary resilience or healthy perseverance. This is about adversarial growth addiction, a psychological pattern where an individual becomes neurologically dependent on stress, struggle, and suffering as the primary mechanism for self-worth and identity formation. Think of your nervous system as a thermostat. Most people's thermostats are set to homeostasis, a balanced state of relative calm, but yours was recalibrated during a critical developmental window. Maybe it was childhood trauma. Maybe it was parentification, where you became the emotional caretaker of your own caregivers. Maybe it was an environment where vulnerability was punished and stoicism was rewarded. Whatever the origin, your nervous system learned a fundamental equation. Safety equals hypervigilance, rest equals danger, pain equals purpose. This is what psychologists call hypervigilance response rewiring. Your amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, became permanently activated, scanning for problems to solve, dragons to slay, mountains to climb. But here's the insidious part. When you can't find external threats, your brain manufactures internal ones. You become the dragon you need to defeat. You create the mountain you need to climb. You generate the pain you need to overcome. Neurologically, this operates through what's known as the opponent process theory. When you experience stress or pain, your brain releases a cocktail of neurochemicals: cortisol, adrenaline, and eventually endorphins and dopamine. That post-struggle high, that sense of accomplishment after pushing through something difficult, that's your reward system lighting up. It feels good. So your brain, being the pattern-seeking machine it is, learns pain leads to struggle, struggle leads to chemical reward. The cycle reinforces itself until struggle becomes the only way you know how to feel alive. Now layer on top of this what Carl Rogers called conditions of worth. The internalized belief that your value is conditional upon your performance, your strength, your capacity to endure. You learned somewhere deep in your developmental story that you were loved not for being, but for doing, not for your softness, but for your toughness, not for your needs, but for your lack of them. So you became a fortress, impenetrable, self-sufficient, a person who could handle anything. And for a while this worked. It kept you safe, it made you strong, it gave you an identity in a chaotic world. But a fortress is still a prison. And the walls that keep the world out also keep you in. Here is the unbearable truth you've been running from. You have been living your entire life as a clenched fist, and you have forgotten what it feels like to open your hand. The cost of this pattern is not something that can be measured in therapy sessions or self-help books. It is measured in moments. Thousands of tiny moments where you chose pain over peace, struggle over simplicity, armor over intimacy. It is measured in relationships that ended not because you didn't love them, but because you couldn't let them love you. In opportunities you rejected not because they weren't right, but because they felt too easy, too good, too unearned. This is what the philosopher Soren Kierkegaard called the sickness unto death, a despair so profound that it manifests not as the inability to live, but as the inability to rest in living. You are caught in what he termed the despair of willing to be oneself, while simultaneously being unable to accept the self that simply is without the constant proving, the constant striving, the constant transformation of suffering into something productive. You carry an invisible grief that no one acknowledges because from the outside you look fine. Better than fine, you look strong. But inside you are mourning a childhood you never had, a softness you were never allowed, a vulnerability that was weaponized against you until you buried it so deep that you convinced yourself it never existed. The core fear driving this entire architecture is not the fear of failure. It's the fear of unearned rest. The terror that if you stop, if you soften, if you let someone carry you for even a moment, you will be exposed as weak, unworthy, a fraud who was never as strong as they appeared. So you keep pushing, keep climbing, keep bleeding. Because if you stop moving, you might have to feel the full weight of what you've been carrying. And you're not sure you can survive that. But here's the philosophical pivot that changes everything. Carl Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." What if your strength isn't found in your capacity to endure more pain, but in your courage to finally put the burden down? What if the real transformation isn't pain into strength, but pain into peace? What if healing isn't another mountain to climb, but permission to finally stop climbing? Let's talk about what this actually looks like in the architecture of your daily life. Because this pattern doesn't announce itself, it masquerades as ambition, as responsibility, as character. You might find yourself unable to accept help, even when you're drowning. Someone offers to carry your burden, literally or metaphorically, and your entire body recoils. Not because you don't want help, but because accepting it would require you to admit you need it. And admitting need feels like admitting defeat. So you smile, you decline, you carry the weight until your spine fractures, and you call it independence. You might sabotage relationships the moment they become too comfortable. Because comfort feels like complacency. When someone loves you without demanding you prove your worth through suffering, it triggers a deep, primal panic. You start picking fights, creating distance, testing them to see if they'll stay when you're difficult because you've never trusted love that comes easy. Love in your nervous system must be earned through trial by fire. You might become addicted to intensity in all its forms. Toxic relationships feel more real than healthy ones High-stress careers feel more meaningful than balanced ones. You chase drama, crisis, conflict, not because you're broken, but because your nervous system has been trained to interpret intensity as intimacy, struggle as purpose, pain as proof of existence. You might experience what psychologists call success anxiety. When things are going well, when life is flowing, when you're happy, you panic. Your brain, calibrated for survival mode, doesn't know how to process peace. So you unconsciously create problems. You catastrophize. You find the flaw in the perfection, the crack in the foundation, the disaster waiting to happen. Because preparing for pain feels safer than enjoying peace. You might struggle with rest as a moral failure. A day off feels like laziness. A vacation feels like weakness. Sleep feels like lost productivity. You've internalized a capitalistic, militaristic relationship with your own body, where every moment must be earned, every rest must be justified, every pleasure must be balanced with an equal measure of suffering. You might find yourself incapable of celebrating your own achievements. You finish something extraordinary, a project, a milestone, a transformation, and within hours you're already focused on the next mountain, the next challenge, the next proof of worth. Because you've never learned how to simply be in your accomplishments, you can only exist in the striving. Here's what you need to understand. These are not personality traits. These are coping mechanisms. Adaptive strategies that once served a purpose but have outlived their utility. The first step in unlearning this pattern is not to judge it, but to witness it, to see it clearly, to name it without shame. You are not weak for developing this pattern, you are brilliant. Your nervous system performed an extraordinary feat of psychological engineering to keep you safe in an environment that required you to be strong. The problem is that the environment has changed, but the engineering hasn't. You're still running software designed for survival in a context that requires thriving. So how do you unlearn a pattern that has been writing your story since before you had language to name it? The path isn't about becoming weaker. It's about redefining what strength actually means. True healing begins with radical witnessing, the practice of observing your patterns without immediately trying to fix, change, or transcend them. When you notice yourself choosing the hard path, pause. Ask, am I choosing this because it aligns with my values, or because the easy path terrifies me? When you notice yourself rejecting help, pause. Ask, what am I actually afraid will happen if I let someone carry me? This is the practice of self-compassionate inquiry, and it is the opposite of self-judgment. You're not interrogating yourself. You're getting curious about the protective mechanism that once saved your life. The next layer is what therapists call inner child reparenting, the deliberate practice of giving yourself what you needed but never received. This might look like speaking to yourself the way you wish someone had spoken to you when you were young and afraid. It might look like deliberately choosing ease when your instinct screams for difficulty. It might look like letting yourself cry without immediately needing to fix the emotion or extract a lesson from the pain. One of the most powerful practices in this unlearning is what Jungian analysts call shadow work, the integration of the disowned parts of yourself. In your case, the shadow isn't your darkness, it's your softness, your need, your vulnerability. The parts of you that want to rest, to receive, to be held. These parts terrify you more than any external threat because they were the parts that got you hurt, so you exiled them. But they didn't disappear. They've been living in your nervous system, creating the very anxiety you've been trying to outrun. Integration means inviting these parts back. It means saying to your vulnerability, I see you, I'm sorry I abandoned you, you are not weakness. You are the part of me that knows how to connect. Here's the profound truth that no one tells you about healing. It's not about becoming a different person, it's about becoming whole. And wholeness includes the parts of you that are soft, scared, tired, and human. The Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron writes, "The most fundamental aggression to ourselves, the most fundamental harm we can do to ourselves, is to remain ignorant by not having the courage and the respect to look at ourselves honestly and gently." That's the work. Not to be fixed, not to be stronger, but to be honest. To look at your pattern and say, "Thank you for protecting me. You were brilliant. You saved my life, but I'm safe now, and I'm ready to learn a different way." The final piece of this puzzle is the deliberate practice of choosing softness. This is terrifying, it feels like betrayal. But here's what you'll discover. Softness is not weakness. Softness is what allows you to bend without breaking. Softness is what allows you to receive love. Softness is what allows you to finally put down the burden you were never meant to carry alone. You were never supposed to turn pain into strength forever. You were supposed to survive long enough to find safety. And now that you're here, older, wiser, with resources you didn't have as a child, you get to make a different choice. You get to choose the easy path not because you're weak, but because you're finally strong enough to believe you deserve it. You get to let someone help you not because you can't do it alone, but because you don't have to anymore. You get to rest not as a reward for suffering, but as a birthright for being alive. This is the dark psychology behind why pain makes you stronger. Well, it doesn't. Pain makes you defended, strength makes you stronger. And real strength is knowing when to fight and when to lay down your sword. If this resonated with you, if you felt seen in these words, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you want more of these deep dives into the hidden mechanics of our inner worlds. And remember, the goal was never to be invincible. The goal was always to be whole. You don't need to earn your softness. You just need to remember it was always yours.